everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. So today, Lee desperately is trying to get help for the Confederacy, and Lincoln, his popularity has taken a nosedive, and he is holding on by a thread in order to keep his position as President of the United States. Let's get started. At this point in the Civil War, Lincoln has tried multiple occasions to go down and take Richmond. That has proven to be a very difficult thing to do. He sends his top general, the guy that's currently in charge. You know, remember, most of the good generals went to the South. There's a guy named George McClellan. We're going to talk a lot about him today. George McClellan, while he was able to take out the initial Southern leaders, once Robert E. Lee rose through the ranks for the Confederacy and is now in charge of the Confederate military, the Army of Northern Virginia. I'll try to simplify it here, though. Lee has basically been running circles around everybody in the South, and the North hasn't won a battle. The North should absolutely be crushing the South, and they're not. That brings us up to where we are here to start with this thing called the Battle of Antietam. So, Lee realizes if he just sits down here in the South, Lincoln, with basically infinite soldiers, can just keep getting more armies to go down south for Lee to beat. Lee knows that he can't forever hold off the Union invading the South and trying to take over Richmond. So what Lee needs is he needs England and France to get involved. Now, England and France, while they are adamantly against slavery, the United States also has slavery, and nobody has ever actually said slavery is bad. So England and France are like, all right, we'll see how this plays out. England and France would love for the South to become their own country permanently because it makes the United States weaker. However, the last thing they want to do is help out the South, and then the South still lose. So the South and Robert E. Lee have to prove that they could win without the help of England and France before England and France will get involved, which seems ridiculous because if you could win without them, why would you be asking for their help? Anyway, so Lee knows this. So Lee is changing tactics here. Instead of sitting back and just defending Richmond, he is going to invade the North. Does he actually want to take over the North? No. But if he can invade the North and take over a city or wreck shop in the North, because keep in mind, the war is not popular in the North either, then it could make the United States less likely to want to keep fighting if the war looks like it's expanding to their territory instead of just taking place in the South. Or it could get England and France on the side of the South because it looks like the South is getting stronger if they can spread north. So Lee decides to march north. So he marches up into Maryland, which is the state just above Virginia, and he's in Maryland. And now while he is looking for a battle here, he gets caught off guard here at this area called Antietam. It's a really dumb story. That's true. Like his men, let me back up a second before I tell you why the story is stupid. So Lee is marching north to look for a battle. The head general of the United States military, as I've already mentioned him, is this dude, George McClellan, who has already been beat by Lee at least one time, all right? So Lincoln's a little frustrated with McClellan because McClellan, while a good leader, he is pretty slow, all right? McClellan, because one of McClellan's men, keep in mind, McClellan is part of the United States. McClellan's men find some cigars with a note wrapped around them one morning, and the note literally gives away Lee's position. Like, oh, he's right down the road here. This is like one of the dumbest things I've ever heard in history to be an actual true fact. Like that, if that was in a movie, that just seems like lazy writing. But that's literally what happened. So McClellan, unaware that Lee has marched north, because Lee's been trying to do it secret, now realizes Lee is right down the street, and McClellan tells Lincoln, hey, Lee's right down the street. Lincoln's like, go attack him now. McClellan waits multiple days before going and trying to attack Lee. Lee, because no secrets can be kept in the Civil War, Lee knows that McClellan knows where he is. This allows Lee the ability to hunker down in this open field called Antietam. When George McClellan shows up multiple days later, they have to march across like a wide open field, like a half-mile wide open field in order to try to get to Lee. And that's exactly what they do, and it turns into an absolute slaughter. This is a painting of the Battle of Antietam. Lee is hunkered in here in the woods. Now, keep in mind, this is in the north. This is the first battle that takes place in the north. But McClellan just sends human wave after human wave after human wave all day and is finally able to break into the woods, defeat Lee's men, and basically capture Lee's army. But Lee and his right-hand man, his general that's always by his side, Stonewall Jackson, those two are able to escape back down south to Richmond. This was the bloodiest single day in the Western Hemisphere. 22,700 men died in this field in a single afternoon. It's the bloodiest single day in American history. What makes it even worse is that people saw it. Cameras have been invented now. Now you can tell that the top left of this picture, see how that guy looks blurry? That's because cameras, while they were invented, are not very good. If you move, you're really blurry. So cameras are only good for stationary objects, which people learn very quickly is great for after battles when there's a bunch of dead bodies and people would take pictures like this and put it in the newspaper. Remember, people came to picnic at the first Battle of Bull Run. They don't realize how awful war is. They should, but they don't. These pictures start making it into the paper and people are horrified by this. 22,000 people died in an afternoon in a single field. What got accomplished? Nothing. What makes it even worse is who is currently defending Richmond? Because go down and take Richmond, right? That wins the war. Who's defending Richmond? Nobody. Like two people, Robert E. Lee and his other general, Stonewall Jackson, who are down there getting another army together. Lincoln has had an issue with McClellan. McClellan technically won this battle. And Lincoln says, McClellan, now this is in Maryland, so this is right near Washington, D.C. This isn't out in the middle of nowhere, all right? This is nearby Washington, D.C., where Lincoln is residing and trying to run this war. He telegraphs McClellan and says, go to Richmond now and take it over. And McClellan's like, ooh, I'm going to need more men, which was what McClellan would always say. Lincoln, and I just discovered this photograph here planning this. Had not seen this before. This is awesome. This is a photograph. Keep in mind, you have to be very still. These two men are clearly having a stare contest. I mean, this is like a high definition picture. These men probably stayed in this position. Nobody's mouth is moving. There's no blood. These men are just in an absolute stare down with each other because Lincoln says, go down to Richmond and take it over. And McClellan's like, no, I think it'd be too dangerous. So Lincoln comes out here to basically tell him, look, dude, go take over Richmond right now. And this is McClellan basically saying, no, I'm not going to. I need more troops. Lincoln is so fed up with McClellan. This is the second time McClellan's lost to Lincoln. We didn't talk about it in the class, but it was the second Battle of Bull Run. McClellan had lost, and now this is his second interaction with Lincoln, or McClellan's second interaction with Lee. Now he's lost here too. So Lincoln says, you know what? You're fired. Like, I know you won here, but at the end of the day, if you won't follow my direct orders, you can't be my general. And Lincoln fires McClellan. Now, this is because the story here continues with these two, even though Lincoln has fired him and he is no longer in command. So the question here is, explain why Abraham Lincoln fires his top general, George McClellan, after Antietam, even though the Union won. So pause me, answer that completely, or we're moving on. So they didn't have colored pictures back then. I think we can understand that. But these are colorized pictures, and I really like them. So this is a real photograph that an artist has gone through and added color to, which I like. Historically accurate, it's the interpretation of the artist is doing this. But anyway, so it gets awkward here as far as Lincoln as the president. He is not liked in the North. The North isn't winning battles. The only battle that the North has won, Antietam, Lincoln then fires the head general after that. It's not going well. It's very unpopular. And to do what if the North wins the war? Bring the South back in? The South literally is at war with the North. You're going to bring a bunch of people who don't want to be part of you back in? Lincoln has a very low approval rating. He's also already blamed for the guy who, hey, you got elected and half the country left. He is not popular, which means he's going to have to run for re-election here shortly after this time in history. And it doesn't look like he's going to win re-election, because you know who's going to run against him? George McClellan, the guy he fired for not following the lead back down south. George McClellan runs for president. All right, this is his campaign poster, and his vice president was a guy named Pendleton. George McClellan is running for president. He says, hey, this war is stupid. Now he's a Democrat, right? He says, if you elect me, the war's over. I mean, it's over. Meaning, we're going to let the South go be the South. That's fine. We're not going to fight them anymore. We don't want them to be part of us either. So McClellan actually gets a lot of popularity here because the war is not going well. He says, if you elect me, we're just going to end the war on day one, which is something McClellan 100% has the ability to do. Lincoln realizes, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, if McClellan becomes the president, I literally become the president who broke America in half. And again, Lincoln's very unpopular. So Lincoln, and this might seem crazy to you, Lincoln's got to get aggressive here politically in the election 1864. He's going to need every vote he can get. Now these highlighted states here, these are states that are part of the United States during the Civil War: Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia, Delaware, Maryland. What's unique about these 5 states is they are part of the United States and they can vote in the election. They're all slave states, but they can vote. So Lincoln, knowing he's going to need every vote imaginable to have any shot of winning an election, caters to the slave states here. All right. He actually picks for his vice president a guy named Andrew Johnson to run with him in 1864. Andrew Johnson is a Democrat. Abraham Lincoln's a Republican. He's a Democrat, a pro-slavery Democrat. Is Abraham Lincoln's vice president that he's going to run with in 1864. Why would Lincoln do this? Because clearly Lincoln's not a big fan of slavery. Lincoln does this because he's trying to get the votes of these 5 states. All right. So that's why he picks a pro-slavery Democrat to run with him. And again, it is not looking good at this point. But the question here is, explain the logic behind Lincoln picking a pro-slavery Democrat as a running mate in his 1864 re-election bid. Again, Lincoln, who, so spoiler alert, is going to be known as the president that ends slavery. Why in the world would he run for with a pro-slavery Democrat on his campaign? So we just talked about that. It has to do with McClellan. So pause me, answer that completely, and we're moving on. All right. This might be the most misunderstood document in American history. And it's not like it's hard to understand. It's a little different. And anyway, you may have heard of the Emancipation Proclamation. Probably talked about it ever since elementary school. What did the Emancipation Proclamation do? And you've probably been taught to say, it freed the slaves. Nah, it didn't. All right? The Emancipation Proclamation is an extremely famous document. But it doesn't free the slaves, even though it literally says all the slaves are free. Hooray, Mr. Wagstaff! Wait, what do you mean it says all the slaves are free, but it doesn't free the slaves? Because it's very specific on how it says it. It says all the slaves in the rebelling states are now free, which is interesting. Because who's the rebelling states in Lincoln's mind? The Confederacy. All those slaves are free now. Well, does Lincoln have any authority over the Confederacy? No. No. And you're like, well, at least his heart's in the right place. He's freeing all the slaves he can. No, he doesn't. Because there's 5 slave states in the North. They get to keep their slaves. Why would he do that? Because slave owners vote. And he needs their vote in that 1864 election. The Emancipation Proclamation, actually, it doesn't free any slaves in the South. He has no control over them. The places he does have control in the North doesn't free any of them either. So why is the Emancipation Proclamation so famous then, Mr. Wagstaff? It seems like it's a big nothing. It's really famous for something it does that gets zero credit for it. Abraham Lincoln, and this is a painting of him like sitting down, really thinking about the wording to the Emancipation Proclamation. When Abraham Lincoln releases this, he had learned after the Battle of Antietam, why in the world was Lee going north? Like that blows my mind. Like, why would that happen? Like, I don't understand why in the world would Lee go north. And he realizes Lee is trying to get England and France involved in this war. Lincoln's smart, figures it out. And then he realizes, wait a minute, the reason England and France would be willing to side with a slave country is because we as a country have never actually said slavery is bad. So Lincoln passes the Emancipation Proclamation as a statement to England and France, hey, we think slavery is bad. Even though he doesn't actually free any slaves, by saying out loud slavery is bad, okay, follow me here. Since he says slavery is bad, it's going to be real hard for England and France to side with the country that says slavery is good and fight against the country that says slavery is bad. Lincoln learned after Lee invaded the North the first time, he has to keep England and France out, and the Emancipation Proclamation is designed to keep England and France from supporting the Confederacy during during the Civil War. These are the states that are targeted, which is literally all the states that are in the Confederacy, because these are all the slave states. The ones omitted are ones that are part of the United States of America. And this is another picture of the Confederate States of America. But the question here is, explain how the Emancipation Proclamation was more of a statement to foreign countries, specifically England and France, than it was to the Union or the Confederacy. Now, that did in very rare cases do some specific positives for slaves. It used the term contraband. Basically, if a northern army takes over a southern town, and this would happen occasionally, and there were a bunch of slaves in that town, the Emancipation Proclamation spells out that in a time of war, contraband is when property of a place you're invading gets taken over, all that property becomes your property. Well, since slaves, according to the South, was property, that the slaves then become property of the United States, and that it clarifies in the Emancipation Proclamation, in that situation, those slaves are freed. So in that rare situation in which slaves found themselves being viewed as property and liberated by an incoming Union army, yes, that would officially free some slaves. But outside of that, there was very little. The United States military did allow freed slaves, escaped slaves, freed slaves, and black people to join the United States military. By the end of the Civil War, 10% of the United States military, the Union military, 10% was of African American. The South had no black people fighting for it, or slaves. Slaves were never put into, that's a whole nother thing. Not a thing to happen at any point, ever. Not a single situation. All right, so pause me, we're moving on. So Lee, once again, all right, he has been attacked at this point multiple times at Richmond, at Chancellorsville, at Fredericksburg, and he's just defeated all comers. Anybody else that replaced McClellan, they're trash. McClellan wasn't great. Lee's just wrecking shop. But once again, Lee realizes he can't just sit back and wait. So once again, Lee, trying to get England and France involved, he knows the Emancipation Proclamation hurts his chances of getting them involved. But he also knows that Lincoln is very unpopular. If he can take this battle to the North again, it is going to make Lincoln's popularity plummet. Lee wants McClellan to win the election in 1864 because then you've won the war because McClellan will let you go. So Lee, trying to make this war unpopular even more for Abraham Lincoln, once again gets the last army he has, his last legitimate army, and marches north to go fight a battle in the north. So he is going to march through a area called into Pennsylvania. Lee is looking for a place to attack. Where this battle is going to take place, Gettysburg, is not the intended place for it to take place. What happens is as Lee is moving north secretly, all right, and the North doesn't really know where his army is at, his men make a detour to go to Gettysburg to get shoes. That might seem weird to you, but these are the shoes that were issued to soldiers in the Civil War in the South. These are like new shoes, all right? They got destroyed very quickly. Also imagine you're marching from one part of the country to the other on foot. You'll wear out shoes pretty quick. The South, from the beginning, has had a really hard time getting supplies. You know who has a bunch of supplies? The North. You know where the Southern Army is now? In the North. So Gettysburg is supposed to have a place for shoes, all right, like a warehouse of shoes. So some men take a detour to Gettysburg. They're not supposed to. They happen to run into some soldiers from the North in this deserted town of Gettysburg, and they open fire at each other. When they start shooting, the rest of Lee's big army comes up over the hill. Unknown is there is a large Union army on the other side of the town of Gettysburg. They come over the hill, and the largest battle in the history of the Western Hemisphere, because it takes 3 days, begins here at the Battle of Gettysburg. So the question here is, explain why shoes would have been so important at this time that Southern soldiers would have risked giving away their positions in order to acquire new ones. Why were shoes so important to them? All right, so pause me, answer that completely. Moving on. So we need to talk about some leadership here in Gettysburg. And I don't really want to throw anybody under the bus here because it's more of look what can happen when you have good leadership, because Gettysburg doesn't have a lot of that. So Robert E. Lee is here, sure, but his favorite general, Stonewall Jackson, had actually died earlier that year. All right, Stonewall Jackson is extremely important to Lee. He had actually been shot by his own men, got shot in his arm and ended up dying. You want to know how famous and important Stonewall Jackson is? This is a tombstone of Stonewall Jackson where he died on May 10th, 1863. Nearby, there's this gravestone where his arm is, because they had to amputate it trying to save his life and they're unable to. This is 7 days prior when they had to amputate his arm. They literally have a gravestone for this man's arm. All right. Stonewall Jackson is an incredibly important part to Robert E. Lee, and Robert E. Lee is going to struggle to replace him. So when the Battle of Gettysburg takes place, his new second in command, Robert E. Lee's new second in command, is a man named General James Longstreet. The goal from the beginning of this battle is to take over this hill called Little Round Top. Lee tells Longstreet to take over Little Round Top. If he had told Jackson, Jackson would have taken it immediately. Longstreet waits too long. It's now day 2 of this battle, and Little Round Top has been taken over by the Union forces. This is really starting to stress Robert E. Lee and Longstreet, and Lee looks at Longstreet and says, I don't care what you do, you take over that hill. So on day 3, Longstreet orders Pickett. This is George Pickett, General George Pickett. He gets the blame for this unfairly, I think. George Pickett is ordered to charge Little Round Top with 15,000 men. He had 5,000. There's 2 other generals, but regardless, it's called Pickett's charge. And the dumbest thing he could have done, that he was literally ordered to do, is pack up and charge across this field at Gettysburg on day 3, and it's just an absolute slaughter of Confederate troops. This is the last legitimate military like an invading force level military the South is going to have. Because of this, after Pickett's charge, there is 0% chance you're going to win this battle. And Lee and the few soldiers he has left have to turn around and retreat back down south. This is a painting of Pickett's charge. It was just a firing squad on top of, like they're shooting down from Little Round Top to the soldiers. 57,000 people died in this battle that lasted 3 days in a single field. Just shocking. Robert E. Lee is still in charge. He's run back down south. There's very little military he can scrounge together. He's getting boys and old men. I mean, but this was his last major ability to invade. Again, Robert E. Lee has yet to be defeated, but he keeps losing the armies, and the South doesn't have the ability to replace them like the North does. This is photographs that make the newspaper. Again, popularity against Lincoln is not good. 57,000 people died. Lincoln, what are we doing? Why are we trying to join back with these people who were clearly murdering each other? And Lincoln is starting to panic here because it is hard to really view a lot of this as positives in the eyes of the public. So the question here is, how does Gettysburg show the importance of having good leadership in battle? Basically, what would have happened if Stonewall Jackson had been there? Or what do you think might have happened? So, answer that completely. The story just progressively keeps getting more and more awesome as we move forward. All right, see you guys tomorrow.